Welcome, the anointed ones. The greatest trick the fool ever pulled was making you think he was one. Now, here's a fact that will blow your mind. Some of the world's most brilliant people were underestimated, mocked, and dismissed as fools until they proved everyone wrong. Albert Einstein was labeled a slow learner, Steve Jobs was fired from his own company, and even Nikola Tesla died broke while the world stole his ideas. What do they all have in common? They played the long game. See, the funny thing about intelligence is that it doesn't always wear a name tag. It doesn't show up in a flashy suit with a megaphone screaming, "Hey everyone, I'm a genius." No, true intelligence often moves in silence, camouflaged by humility, misjudged by the blind, and completely overlooked by those who think they know it all. And that's where you come in. They thought you were a fool. They laughed, dismissed, and underestimated you. But what they didn't realize was that you were watching, learning, adapting, quietly sharpening yourself while they basked in their own arrogance. Now the tables have turned. The same people who once looked down on you are now struggling to understand how you became smarter, sharper, and more unstoppable than they ever imagined. So, let's talk about it. Why do the chosen ones always get underestimated? Why do the so-called fools often end up being the masterminds? And most importantly, how do you use this underestimation to your ultimate advantage? Because if history has proven anything, it's this. The moment they think they have you figured out is the moment they've already lost. Let's begin. Number 1. The miscalculation of superiority. Why they underestimated you. People who underestimate others often make one deadly mistake. They assume intelligence is always obvious. They believe smart people are the ones who speak the loudest, use the fanciest words, or constantly remind the world how brilliant they are. But real intelligence doesn't need to be loud. In fact, it's often invisible until it strikes. The reason they thought you were a fool wasn't because you lacked intelligence. It was because they lacked perception. They couldn't recognize depth beyond the surface. If you weren't showing off, if you weren't aggressively proving yourself, they assumed there was nothing there. This is a common flaw in arrogant minds. They mistake quiet observation for ignorance. Meanwhile, while they were busy performing intelligence, you were actually building it. You weren't wasting energy trying to impress anyone. You were paying attention, picking up patterns, and analyzing everything. They were too distracted by their own self-importance to notice that you were growing in the shadows. And that's exactly why your intelligence is so much sharper than theirs. Because it wasn't built on ego. It was built on real understanding. The smartest people don't always reveal their full hand. They don't waste time arguing with people who won't listen. They don't announce their every move, and because of that, they're often misjudged, until it's too late. The moment people finally realize the truth, the damage is already done. You've already surpassed them, you've already outmaneuvered them, and now they're the ones struggling to catch up. The irony? They were so convinced of their own superiority that they never saw the switch coming. The very arrogance that made them underestimate you is the same arrogance that blinded them to your rise. They thought you were a fool. But the only fools here were the ones who assumed they could see everything without ever looking deeper. Number 2. Society's lie. Why the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. Society has tricked people into believing that the loudest person in the room is the smartest. Confidence gets mistaken for competence, and flashy words are confused for deep thinking. The truth? Most of the people who constantly talk about how intelligent they are aren't. Real intelligence doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't need to dominate every conversation or prove itself in every room. It just is. The problem is, people who love the sound of their own voice often don't realize they're exposing themselves. They think talking over others makes them look powerful, but all it really does is reveal their insecurity. People who are truly smart don't need to interrupt, overshare, or force their opinions down people's throats. They listen, they observe, they choose their words carefully. That's why they're so often underestimated, because their intelligence isn't a performance. It's something deeper. Meanwhile, the so-called smartest people, the ones who never shut up, the ones who make a big show of their intelligence, are usually just recycling things they've heard elsewhere. They might sound convincing, but there's no real thinking happening behind the scenes. They thrive on the illusion of intelligence, not the reality of it. And because they're so obsessed with making sure everyone knows they're smart, they never stop to question whether they actually are. That's where they went wrong with you. They assumed that because you weren't constantly announcing your intelligence, you didn't have any. But while they were busy showing off, you were busy learning. While they were talking, you were thinking. And now, the gap between you and them is something they can't ignore. The real irony: the loudest people often rely on external validation. They need others to believe they're smart, to feel good about themselves. But real intelligence? It doesn't need validation. It stands on its own. And when the dust settles, the ones who spent all their energy trying to prove their intelligence are left wondering why they never actually got any smarter. Number 3, the fool. Archetype, the secret weapon of the wisest minds. The fool has always been one of the most misunderstood characters in history. People assume that being underestimated is a curse, but in reality it's one of the greatest advantages a person can have. When people don't see you as a threat, they don't guard themselves against you. They don't take you seriously, which means they make mistakes around you. They expose their true thoughts, their weaknesses, their arrogance, all because they assume you're too simple to notice. But what they don't realize is that the fool is often the wisest person in the room. History is full of so-called fools who turned out to be masterminds. Some of the most powerful figures, leaders, inventors, revolutionaries were laughed at, mocked, and dismissed. Why? Because their intelligence wasn't obvious to those too blind to see it. The best thinkers don't announce themselves. They move quietly, absorb information, and strike when the time is right. Meanwhile, the ones who underestimate them walk straight into their own downfall, never realizing they were being outmaneuvered the entire time. People who are obsessed with looking smart never understand this. They see life as a game where intelligence is something you prove, not something you use strategically. But real intelligence? It doesn't rush. It doesn't seek attention. It waits. And by the time people figure out they've misjudged you, you've already won. They thought they were laughing at a fool, but they were really exposing themselves. They revealed their arrogance, their lack of depth, their complete inability to recognize intelligence when it wasn't spoon-fed to them. And now, they have to live with the knowledge that they never saw your brilliance coming. That's the power of being underestimated. It gives you room to grow without interference. It allows you to move undetected. It turns you into someone no one expects, until the moment they realize they were the fool all along. Number 4, the ego trap. Why their own overconfidence became their blind spot. Arrogance is one of the most self-destructive traits a person can have, and the ones who mocked you were drowning in it. They were so convinced of their superiority that they never questioned whether they were actually as smart as they thought. Their confidence wasn't built on deep understanding, it was built on assumption. They assumed they knew more. They assumed they were more capable, and worst of all, they assumed they couldn't be wrong. That assumption was their downfall. People who think they already have all the answers stop looking for new ones. They stop evolving. They stop questioning. And in that moment, they start falling behind. The world keeps moving. New ideas keep emerging, but they stay locked in their own outdated beliefs, completely unaware that they are no longer ahead. Meanwhile, you, being the one they dismissed, were forced to keep growing. You had no choice but to sharpen your mind, develop your skills, and push yourself harder than they ever did. Their arrogance kept them stagnant, while your underestimation became your greatest advantage. The most dangerous people in any field are the ones who think they've already made it. They stop adapting because they don't think they need to, and when they finally realize they were wrong, it's too late. By the time they start to take you seriously, you're already 10 steps ahead. Their ego made them blind, but your hunger for knowledge made you unstoppable. And now, they're in a position they never saw coming, struggling to keep up with the very person they once looked down on. But the truth is they were never superior to begin with. They just talked a good game. And now, they have no choice but to watch as you pass them by, silent, focused, and far smarter than they ever imagined. Number 5. The art of playing dumb, how you weaponized their ignorance. There's a reason the smartest people in history rarely announce their intelligence. They don't need to. Instead, they do something far more powerful. They let others think they're foolish. Because when people believe you're not a threat, they let their guard down. They become sloppy, reckless, and dangerously overconfident. And that's when they start revealing everything you need to know. The people who underestimated you made one fatal mistake. They assumed silence meant stupidity. They thought that because you weren't constantly proving yourself, you had nothing to offer. But while they were busy talking, you were busy watching. You noticed the way they moved, the patterns in their thinking, the hidden insecurities buried in their arrogance. You weren't clueless, you were collecting data. And the best part? They handed it to you willingly. When someone believes you're too dumb to understand, they don't filter themselves. They expose their weaknesses, their true motivations, and even their biggest fears. They assume they're in control, but in reality, they are feeding you the exact information you need to outmaneuver them later. You weren't weak, you weren't clueless, you were just patient. That's the real art of playing dumb. It's not about pretending to be less. It's about giving people just enough of what they expect to keep them comfortable in their delusions. Because when they think they have you figured out, they stop looking deeper. They never suspect that the person they dismissed is actually the one who has been studying them the entire time. And by the time they realize the truth, it's already too late. The fool they laughed at turns out to be the only one who truly understands the game. And now, they're the ones who never saw it coming. Number 6. Emotional intelligence, the silent power they never noticed. Most people think intelligence is just about knowledge, big words, complex ideas, and technical skills. But the smartest person in the room isn't always the one with the highest IQ. It's the one who understands people. Emotional intelligence is the silent power that controls everything, yet most people overlook it because it doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't show up in debates or in flashy displays of intellect. Instead, it works in the shadows, shaping interactions, decisions, and outcomes in ways most people never realize. The people who mocked you were too busy trying to prove their intelligence. They focused on facts, logic, and appearances, thinking that's what made them superior. But while they were playing that game, you were playing a deeper one. You weren't just listening to their words. You were reading between them. You noticed the hesitation in their voice, the nervous shift in their posture, the way their confidence cracked when certain topics came up. They thought they were winning because they controlled the conversation, but they didn't realize you were controlling the energy. And here's the real advantage. When you understand emotions, you understand people. And when you understand people, you can predict their moves before they make them. You know what triggers them, what motivates them, what makes them weak. That's why emotional intelligence is so powerful. It's not just about reacting to situations. It's about shaping them from the inside out. Meanwhile, the ones who dismissed you never developed this skill. They thought intelligence was all about being the smartest person in the room, not realizing that the real power lies in being the most aware. And now, they can't figure out why you always seem to be 3 steps ahead. Why people trust you more, why things seem to work in your favor while they struggle to keep up. They never noticed the power you held because they never knew where to look, and by the time they did, you had already mastered the game they didn't even know existed. Number 7. Survival intelligence, the form of genius. They can't recognize. Some forms of intelligence can't be measured by test scores or fancy degrees. Survival intelligence is one of them. It's the type of genius that isn't learned in a classroom, but forged in the fire of real-life struggle. It's the ability to read energy before words are spoken, to sense danger before it arrives, to adapt when everything is stacked against you. And the people who underestimated you? They never even knew this kind of intelligence existed. They thought you were slow because you didn't respond the way they expected. You didn't jump into pointless debates. You didn't seek validation. You didn't play by the rules they created. What they didn't realize was that you were operating in a completely different world than them. While they had the luxury of coasting through life on their confidence alone, You had to develop instincts that kept you ahead. They had comfort. You had survival. And that built a different kind of sharpness, one they could never understand. Survivors don't waste time proving how smart they are. They don't get caught up in intellectual ego games. They don't argue just to be right. Instead, they focus on what matters, staying ahead, staying aware, staying adaptable. That's why the people who underestimated you are now confused. They thought they were winning, but you were playing a different game altogether, one where intelligence wasn't about showing off, but about staying one step ahead of every challenge. And now, those same people struggle when things don't go their way. They lack resilience. They lack instinct. When life throws them into unfamiliar territory, they crumble, because they never had to develop the intelligence that you were forced to master. They thought they were smarter, but the truth is you were just surviving a battlefield they never even knew existed. And now, that intelligence has become your greatest weapon. Number 8. The hidden growth. Why being underestimated allowed you to evolve. Being underestimated is one of the greatest advantages a person can have. It might not feel that way at first, being overlooked, dismissed, or even ridiculed, but in reality, it gives you something rare: freedom. When people expect nothing from you, they don't watch your every move. They don't try to control your progress. They don't interfere with your evolution. They leave you alone. And that's exactly why you were able to grow in ways they never could. While they were busy performing intelligence, seeking validation, proving themselves, making sure everyone noticed their so-called brilliance, you had the luxury of focusing on actual growth. You weren't distracted by applause. You didn't waste time trying to impress people who didn't matter. Instead, you kept sharpening your mind, developing skills, learning lessons they ignored. And the best part? They never saw it happening. They assumed they were ahead, so they never looked back. Meanwhile, you were evolving in silence, gaining knowledge, mastering your craft. Their arrogance made them comfortable, but your position as the underdog kept you hungry. They wasted years polishing their image, while you spent that time actually becoming better. And now, the results speak for themselves. The same people who once laughed at you are confused. They don't understand how you surpassed them. They don't realize that by underestimating you, they gave you the perfect environment to become unstoppable. Being overlooked wasn't a curse. It was a gift. It gave you time, space, and the element of surprise. And now they have no choice but to watch as the person they dismissed rises higher than they ever imagined. Number 9. The underdog's revenge. Why those who struggle become the strongest. There's something about being counted out that does something to a person. It ignites a fire inside you that nothing else can. When people mock you, when they doubt your abilities, when they assume you won't amount to anything, that's when you become unstoppable. Their rejection becomes the fuel that drives you forward. The ones who mocked you had no idea that their dismissal wasn't just a blow to your ego, it was a challenge you would rise to meet. While they coasted on their comfort, assuming they had everything figured out, you were grinding. You were forced to work harder, dig deeper, and think more creatively. Every rejection, every sneer, every laugh was like a nudge pushing you to refine your craft, sharpen your mind, and build the resilience they never had to develop. The truth is, struggle is the greatest teacher. Those who face adversity learn how to adapt, how to think critically, how to keep going even when things seem impossible. They develop a mental toughness that others can't even fathom. While they were on autopilot, basking in their self-assurance, you were fighting to prove that you belonged, and that fight transformed you into something stronger than they ever imagined. Now, when they see you succeeding, they don't understand how it happened. They can't comprehend how you went from being the underdog to becoming a force they can't ignore. But the reality is simple. Their mockery made you who you are. It pushed you past your limits, it gave you the hunger to succeed, and it sharpened you into something far more dangerous than they ever realized. And the most ironic part? They're still trying to figure out how you did it, while you stand on top, knowing that their doubt was the very thing that propelled you to greatness. Number 10. The curse of the predictable mind. Why they never saw your rise coming. The moment people start thinking they have life figured out, is the moment they start losing. People who believe they are superior often fall into the trap of predictability. They think success follows a linear path, a fixed script that can be mapped out and controlled. And because they think they know what comes next, they become complacent, trapped in their own narrow view of the world. But you never followed their script. You never let their expectations box you in. While they were busy plotting their predictable moves, convinced they had every angle covered, you were thinking in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. You weren't following the same patterns, the same routines, or the same rules they had set up. You didn't operate within their limits. You found new ways to approach the game. Their biggest weakness was their inability to break free from their own illusions. They believed they had all the answers because everything they'd ever done had worked out just fine within the predictable framework they built. But what they didn't realize is that the world doesn't follow a script. And life doesn't reward people for staying stuck in the comfort of what they already know. It rewards those who can see beyond the horizon, those who understand that the real opportunities lie in the spaces others overlook. So while they remained trapped in their predictable patterns, you were free to think differently. You saw gaps, opportunities, and possibilities they never could. And by the time they finally realized what was happening, you had already moved far beyond their reach. They thought they knew everything because they had learned to predict the past. But the future, it belonged to you, the one who refused to be confined by their limited thinking. And now, they're left trying to figure out how they never saw your rise coming. Number 11. The patience of a mastermind. Why you waited for the right moment. Genius isn't always about being the fastest or the loudest. Sometimes it's about knowing when to act. The greatest minds don't rush, they wait. They understand that timing is everything. While others were busy expending energy on proving themselves, seeking attention, or trying to stay ahead of the crowd, you remained in the background, quiet but calculating, watching every move. You weren't sitting idly by, you were learning, absorbing, understanding the lay of the land, knowing that the right moment always arrives for those who are patient enough to wait for it. Patience is an art that most people never master. The world often rewards those who hustle, who push forward aggressively, and who flaunt their success before they've even fully earned it. But true power lies in knowing that rushing forward can be your greatest enemy. While others were caught up in the urgency to prove themselves, you understood that the best moves are often the ones made after careful observation and full understanding of the situation. And when the time finally came, you emerged. You were no longer the underestimated one, the quiet observer. You were the undeniable force they had never seen coming. The difference was clear. While they were distracted by their own need for validation, you had been building something far more valuable. Timing, strategy, and precision. The best move isn't always the one that happens in the heat of the moment. It's the one made with clarity after understanding every angle. And now, when you step into the light, fully formed, fully prepared, the world has no choice but to notice. You've already surpassed the moment of doubt, the time of struggle, and when you finally act, there's no denying that you are unstoppable. The patience you displayed wasn't just wisdom, it was the key to everything they couldn't see. Number 12, the awakening. When they realized you were never the fool. There's always a moment, it's inevitable. The moment when the mask falls, the illusions shatter, and the truth comes crashing down on them. Suddenly, they realize what they should have known all along. You were never the fool. The person they laughed at, dismissed, or ignored is now standing at the very top, looking down at them. And in that moment, it's not just surprising, it's terrifying. For them, it's not just about the shock of being wrong about you. It's about the realization that they've been wrong about everything. If they misjudged you, then how many other things have they misjudged? How many assumptions have they made about the world, about others, about themselves, that were based on faulty conclusions? The foundation of their entire worldview starts to crack, and suddenly they're not sure of anything anymore. This is when the discomfort sets in. the gnawing truth they've been avoiding. They were never ahead of you. You were always ahead of them. You just let them think they were in control. You never played by their rules, never followed their script. You moved at your own pace, grew quietly, and bided your time. The difference was, while they were busy assuming they had everything figured out, you were hiding in plain sight. They never saw you as a threat because they never bothered to truly see you at all. They underestimated your strength, your intelligence, your resilience. They thought you'd stay invisible forever, but the truth was, you were always playing a longer game, one that they couldn't comprehend. And when the moment finally came, and the truth unfolded, they were left to grapple with the terrifying realization that they never truly knew who you were. Now you stand above them, and they have no choice but to face the uncomfortable reality that their entire perception of the world, and you, was completely wrong. The tables have turned, and there's no going back. Number 13, the unforgivable sin, why they will never truly accept your growth. The hardest truth to swallow for some people is that their perception of you was completely wrong. They mocked you, dismissed you, and overlooked your potential. And now that you've proven them wrong, they still can't accept it. Why? Because to acknowledge your growth, to admit that you were always smarter, more capable, or more talented than they gave you credit for, means they have to confront one painful reality: they were blind. And that's something most people can't stomach. It's much easier for them to cling to the idea that you got lucky than to face the uncomfortable truth that they completely misjudged you from the beginning. Admitting that you were always right, that you always had the potential to be where you are now, it would force them to see themselves differently. It would shatter their ego and their carefully constructed world where they were the ones in control. So instead of accepting that you outgrew them, they would rather deny your brilliance altogether. But here's the thing: their denial changes nothing. You've already won. Their refusal to acknowledge your intelligence doesn't erase the fact that you've risen, that you've surpassed them, and that you are now on a path they can't follow. Their inability to admit they were wrong about you doesn't diminish your success. It only highlights their insecurity. They will never truly accept your growth because it would mean admitting that they were not as perceptive, not as clever, or not as sharp as they thought. It would mean recognizing that the one they dismissed is now standing far ahead, while they are stuck in a past of their own making. But in the end, that's their problem, not yours. You've already achieved what they never thought possible, and their inability to accept it is just another victory in your journey. You didn't need their approval, and you don't need it now. You've already proved them wrong. Number 14, the final victory, when they realize they need you more than you need them. It's the ultimate twist of fate. The same people who once laughed at you, dismissed you, or looked down on you will eventually find themselves in a position where they need you. Not to mock, not to compete, but to seek your wisdom, your support, or your connections. And when that moment arrives, the irony couldn't be more delicious. The very ones who underestimated your potential are now faced with the truth. They need you more than you need them. This is the point where all the tables turn. They've watched you rise, seen you surpass them, and now they realize that the person they thought was insignificant, the one they once believed was beneath them, is now in a position of power, influence, and value. They might come to you for advice, for help, or for opportunities that only you can provide. They'll be humble, asking questions they once thought beneath them, trying to get a piece of the knowledge or the network you've cultivated. But here's the kicker. They no longer have the position of authority or superiority. Now, it's you with the answers. And what's even more ironic, they're the ones who look foolish, because deep down, they know the truth. They were wrong about you, and the weight of that mistake stings more now than it ever did. In the past, they believed they were the ones in control, but now it's clear that the power has shifted, and the one they dismissed is the one holding the cards. It's a victory you don't have to rub in their faces. The fact that they've come back to you, seeking what they once denied you, is proof enough. They now realize their mistake, but by then, You've already moved far beyond needing their validation. Your growth, your strength, your rise, those are the things that speak louder than any apology or acknowledgement they could offer. You were never dependent on their approval. But now, they are the ones who need you more than you'll ever need them. And that's the final, undeniable victory. The truth they never saw coming is simple. Your intelligence was never the issue. The real problem was their limited perception. They thought they understood you. They thought they had you all figured out. But what they were really seeing was not you. It was their own distorted reflection. They saw what they expected to see, based on their own biases and assumptions, not what was truly there. They mistook your quiet strength for weakness, your patience for indecision, and your silence for ignorance. But that was their mistake. The chosen ones don't need validation or constant approval to fuel their growth. They know that the only thing that matters is time. Time gives them the space to develop, to refine their craft, and to sharpen their mind in ways no one expects. And while others were busy seeking recognition or striving for constant affirmation, you remained patient, knowing that once the time was right, the world would have no choice but to see the truth. Now, the moment has come. They can no longer deny it. The evidence is in front of them, undeniable and irrefutable. And in that moment, they realize the truth they refused to see for so long. You were never beneath them. You were always ahead of them. And as they stand there, confronted with the reality they ignored, they know one thing for sure. They'll never underestimate you again. Because now, they've learned the hardest lesson of all, that when you truly understand your worth and your potential, no one's judgment can hold you back. You've already proven that. And from here on out, the world will see you for exactly what you are, unstoppable. If you've made it this far, then you're one of the chosen ones, someone who truly understands the power of perseverance and self-belief. So if this message resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel because we're just getting started, and there's so much more on the way that will help you unleash your potential. Hit that like button if you've been empowered by this, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going. If you know someone who needs this kind of motivation, share it and let them see what they've been missing. Together, we'll rise, and together, we'll prove that no one can hold us back. Thank you for being here. Keep grinding, keep believing, and I'll see you in the next video.